The white smoke above the Sistine Chapel in March of 2013 marked not just the election of a new head of the Catholic world, but the beginning of the final act in one of the most enigmatic games history has ever played. While the crowd in St. Peter's Square rejoiced, in the silence of the Vatican libraries and in the offices of eschatology researchers, a tension comparable to the calm before a storm hung in the air. The reason for this anxiety lay in the yellowed pages of a manuscript, dated to the end of the 16th century, where concise Latin mottos foretold the fate of each pontiff. We are accustomed to trusting rational analysis and geopolitical forecasts. But here we see a situation where an ancient text begins to dictate the logic of reality. I propose to look at the logistics of this prophecy not as a mystical revelation, but as a strategic document that either possesses frightening accuracy or is a brilliant psychological operation stretched over centuries. Few notice that at the moment of Francis's name announcement, the world did not merely receive the first pope from the New World. It received a figure who perfectly fits into the final line of the list attributed to the Irish Saint Malachy. If we discard the mystical husk and audit this document, we will be presented with a structure striking in its mathematical precision. This is not just a list of names, it is a roadmap to a civilizational finale. Before we delve into the labyrinths of Vatican intrigues and linguistic traps, I urge you to become part of this research. Subscribe to our updates, rate this material, and share it with those who seek the truth behind the facade of official chronicles. Your support helps us continue to search for answers to history's most complex questions, which often remain in the shadows. To understand the scale of the game, we need to transport ourselves to 1139, when the Archbishop of Armagh, the Irishman Malachi, arrived in Rome. Historians dispute the authenticity of his visions, but I suggest we pay attention to the atmosphere of that time. 12th century Rome was not the open-air museum it is today, but a harsh city, permeated with the smell of damp stone and incense, where the struggle for power between emperors and popes reached its climax. According to legend, Malachi fell into a trance and saw a succession of 112 pontiffs, each designated by a short Latin motto. However, here we encounter the first serious contradiction that the official church prefers to bypass. The list did not come to light until 1595. The question arises, where was the document for 456 years? The Benedictine monk Arnold Wion published this list in his work Lignum Vitae, claiming to have found it in the archives. Here we see a fatal lacuna in the document's provenance, which makes any thoughtful researcher wary. Could it have been an elaborate fabrication? At the end of the 16th century, the Vatican was a boiling cauldron of intrigue. The difficult conclave of 1590 was approaching, and the motto of the next pope on Malachy's list, "From the antiquity of the city," surprisingly coincided with the origin of one of the main candidates, Cardinal Simoncelli. This is a classic example of using prophecy as a tool for political marketing. Here, the archetype of the trickster is clearly traceable, a manipulator who creates the illusion of inevitability to guide the will of the electors in the desired direction. But if the list was a forgery of that time, how can we explain its frightening accuracy in subsequent centuries? Let's consider an audit of specific cases that make even hardened skeptics reconsider their positions. Take the motto Peregrinatio Apostolica, Heavenly Journey, corresponding to Pope Pius VII. It was during his pontificate that Napoleon Bonaparte, driven by his exorbitant ambitions, literally tore the Pope from Rome and moved him to France. This is not just a coincidence, it is an accurate hit at the essence of the geopolitical crisis of that era. Or consider the motto, Lumen in Caelo, light in the sky, referring to Leo XIII. Few contemporaries attached importance to the fact that a comet was depicted on this pope's coat of arms. Here we see how personal heraldry becomes a key to deciphering Malachy's code. However, a real chill runs down the spine when analyzing the events of the 20th century. The motto, Fides intrepidus, faith unhappy, or Fides persecuta, persecuted faith, for Benedict XV, whose reign coincided with the First World War and the collapse of great Christian empires. In the headquarters of that time, there was not only the smell of gunpowder, but also the decay of the old world, and the pontiff was powerless in the face of this catastrophe. But the most striking example in our audit is John Paul II, designated as De labore solis, from the labor of the sun. Here we see not just a metaphor. This pope was born on the day of a solar eclipse, May 18, 1920, and was buried on the day of another eclipse, April 8, 2005. The probability of a random coincidence of such dates is negligibly small. This forces us to assume the existence of some deep-seated scenario that goes beyond human planning. Here it is important to integrate the psychological portrait of those who read these lines. Imagine cardinals in the cold corridors of the Vatican, knowing that the list is coming to an end. How does this affect decision-making? When mottos become shorter and the room for maneuver narrower, the archetype of the prophet emerges, who himself hastens the predicted end. We see here an internal conflict between dogmatic calm and eschatological horror. The Vatican officially distances itself from Malachy's prophecies, calling them pious fiction. But I propose to look at the practice. Why then, at every conclave, are these mottos discussed with such seriousness? The conflict between the official version and reality reaches its peak in the story of Benedict XVI. His motto was, Glory of the Olive. The olive branch is the symbol of the Benedictine order, whose name he adopted. But look at the end of his reign, the first voluntary abdication in 600 years. In this decision, we see not just the fatigue of an elderly man, but a strategic retreat. Perhaps he realized that he was the penultimate link in the chain and decided to change the course of events by handing over control at a critical moment. This was a moment of truth, when personal ambitions were sacrificed to an understanding of the scale of the threat. And here we come to the 112th motto, the longest and most somber. In the final persecution of the Holy Roman Church, there will sit Peter the Roman, who will feed his flock amid many tribulations, after which the city of 7 hills will be destroyed and the dreadful judge will judge his people. Francis, the current pontiff, formally does not bear the name Peter. But here lies a linguistic and conceptual trap. His father was from Italy, from Piedmont, which makes him a Roman by origin. Moreover, by choosing the name Francis in honor of Saint Francis of Assisi, whose full name was Giovanni Francesco di Pietro Bernardone, he implicitly included the name Peter in his spiritual profile. Here we see a classic paradox. The prophecy is fulfilled not literally, but through a system of symbols and subtexts. Do you think Francis is that Peter the Roman, or is this just another interpretation fitted to the facts? Write your opinion in the comments. It is critically important for understanding how modern society perceives such signals from the past. Your reasoning helps us build a more complete picture of what is happening. If we analyze the psychological component of Francis's reign, we will see the archetype of the reformer-destroyer. He breaks centuries-old traditions. He demonstrably refuses lavish apartments. he plunges into the thick of social conflicts. In this, one sees preparation for those very many tribulations of which Malachi speaks. But there is another side. Many researchers point out that in Arnold Wyon's original text, after the 111th motto, there was no ordinal number for Peter the Roman. This gives cause for doubt in the official version of the ending. Perhaps Peter the Roman is not a specific person, but a collective image of the Church during its final transformation? Or is it a description of a process rather than a personality? Let's conduct an audit of the ideological clash occurring here. On one side is a linear perception of time, where everything has a beginning and an end, dictated from above. On the other is a cyclical model, where the destruction of the City of Seven Hills merely signifies a change of eras, a transition from an old world to a new one. Malachi's prophecy, in this context, acts as a psychological trigger, forcing humanity to reflect on the finitude of its governance systems. The Vatican, as the oldest corporation in the world, faces a challenge that cannot be countered by financial or political methods. This is a challenge of meaning. Few notice that when Francis ascended the throne, lightning struck St. Peter's Basilica. A photograph of this moment flew around the world. One can call it a caprice of the weather, but in the context of our investigation, it looks like an exclamation mark at the end of a sentence. At that hour in Rome, it was damp. The air was saturated with the smell of ozone and wet asphalt, and this electrical discharge seemed to close the circuit between the 12th century and the 21st. This is that micro-history that brings dry facts to life. We see how nature plays along with the myth, creating a sense of presence for millions of observers. In the course of my analysis, I discovered another strange discrepancy. In some versions of the list circulating in the 17th century, the mottos for the last popes were more detailed, but later they were shortened. Why? Here we encounter future censorship. Someone in the Curia's structures, perhaps, considered that excessive specificity might provoke panic, or, even worse, make the prophecy too easily verifiable. This is a typical security strategy, to leave just enough information to inspire awe, but not to provide clear coordinates for counteraction. The personal ambitions of each pontiff in this chain inevitably clashed with their shadow, the realization that they were merely actors in a play written long before their birth. Imagine the psychological pressure on a person whose motto reads, "From the evil serpent," or "Death to religion." This cannot but affect strategic planning. Every papal decision, from an encyclical to the appointment of a cardinal, passes through the prism of this expectation of the finale. Here we see how prophecy turns into a self-fulfilling prediction. If you believe you are the last, you will act like the last, closing accounts and tying up loose ends. The transformation we are witnessing today concerns not only religion, it is a transformation of the very principle of authority. Saint Malachy's prophecy is, in essence, an audit of the legitimacy of the old world. If the list ends, then the time of hierarchies built on mystery and an exclusive right to truth also ends. The final motto about Peter the Roman and the destruction of the city is a metaphor for the collapse of institutional faith in favor of something else. We see how the modern world, with its technologies and global risks, surprisingly resonates with the eschatological expectations of a medieval monk. The culmination of this process is unfolding right now. We live in an era of many tribulations, and it's not just about climate or wars, but about a profound crisis of identity. Francis, tending his sheep, faces the fact that the flock is scattering in search of new meanings. His role as Peter the Roman is not to save the Vatican as a building or a state, but to guide the structure through the point of no return. This is the paradox. The destruction of the city in the prophecy may mean the dismantling of a system that has become too cumbersome and unviable. Here we see the culmination of an ideological conflict between preserving form and saving essence. Malachy's prophecy is not a threat. It is a warning that any system has an expiration date. And when we audit the decisions of the current church leadership, we see attempts to adapt to this finale. But can one adapt to the apocalypse? Or is the apocalypse itself adaptation through destruction? Looking at modern realities, we learn lessons that remain relevant regardless of whether we believe in prophecies or not. The first lesson is the understanding that symbols rule the world much more effectively than direct orders. Malachy's list has managed the expectations of millions of people for centuries, shaping the political and spiritual landscape. The second lesson is the inevitability of an end for any, even the most powerful organization. The Vatican, existing for 2 millennia, is forced to reckon with a piece of paper from the 12th century. This is a lesson in humility in the face of time. Modernity teaches us that the end of the world is not necessarily a flash in the sky. It can be the slow fading of old meanings and the painful, chaotic birth of new ones. We see this in the crisis of trust in institutions. In the breakdown of traditional ties, Malachy's prophecy gives us a coordinate system in this chaos, even if that system seems frightening to us. It tells us that destruction is followed by judgment, not necessarily divine, but historical and moral. We ourselves judge our past, deciding what to take with us into the future. Returning to the beginning of our journey, to that very white smoke above the Sistine Chapel, we understand that each of us is a participant in this process. We are all searching for our mottos, our guideposts in a world that is changing faster than we can comprehend it. Was Malachy a holy seer, or was his name used for a grand mystification? Ultimately, this is not as important as the fact that his text forces us to ask the right questions. We started with a mysterious list of 112 popes and came to realize that history is not just a series of dates, but a complex interplay of meanings and psychological archetypes. Here we see how ancient doubt in the official version becomes a driver of progress. I urge you not to stop here. Our investigation is just beginning, and new, even more exciting stories await us. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next audit of history. Write about which historical period or personality you would like to analyze with the same depth and passion. We create this content together with you, and your participation is what gives us the strength to seek truth amidst the ruins of the past. The city of 7 hills may stand forever, but the ideas that filled it are as fluid as the waters of the Tiber. We look at Francis and see in him a reflection of our fears and hopes. Whether he is the last or merely the first in a new, unknown chain, time will tell, which knows no words or dates but speaks the language of accomplished facts. Remember that every end is just a beginning in disguise, and our understanding of this process determines what our next step will be. See you in new investigations, where we will continue to peel back the layers of official history, revealing its true, sometimes frightening, but always fascinating face.